Welcome to If Prices Could Talk, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of pricing, sales, and negotiation. I'm your host, Tracy Dent. Join me as we explore strategies and current events shaping the future of pricing power in B2B, featuring insights from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Let's jump into today's conversation. All right, this is our first podcast episode of 2025.
Yeah.
We've got a couple different news stories to get into, or headlines that have happened. This has been a crazy couple weeks overall for all of us, but specific to B2B pricing, things happening in the news for companies going private, companies going public, and related headlines. Let me just walk through some of the things on our agenda. So we've got Boeing closing the books on a terrible 2024. Will they make a comeback? We've got Nvidia's Project Digits, the AI personal supercomputer. Nordstrom family business reaching a $4 billion deal to take the retailer private. And then the first one, this is what I want to start with. So Klarna scores global payment deal with Stripe to expand reach ahead of blockbuster US IPO. So this is CNBC. So let me just, a couple things about this. Klarna, for people listening, if you don't know, Klarna is the buy now, pay later software. They've been in talks to do a big IPO. They are a Swedish unicorn startup. From 2005 is when they opened this whole thing, started the company, and then Stripe allows them to open their markets and have much broader reach. So what's interesting about this one, they filed for IPO in November. It seems like this could be up to like $20 billion. So a lot of people have been talking about this for a while, but for them to announce this partnership so close to an IPO is what I thought would be worth talking about. The buy now, pay later stuff, by the way, which I've seen, maybe just after reading about this, I've seen it more and more because you've got like Amex has their Planet thing. Apple Pay has a later planning thing. PayPal, there's all kinds of fintech startups. The fintech space is growing like crazy anyway. So do you think this kind of thing is like a signal for a new trend? Or have you seen this trend before where you get like this big partnership announcement right before an IPO?
I don't know that I can necessarily speak to the trend of a partnership before an IPO, but if I had to
Yeah.
kind of pontificate in terms of the rationale behind it, what comes to my mind is they want to showcase the fact that they can be kind of more of a one-stop shop for merchants, meaning that not only can we go in and offer your customers the option of buy now, pay later, but as a result of the partnership with Stripe, we have the ability to process a payment. Point being that it just allows them for incremental differentiation versus these other options that are out there, and they want to showcase that in the market. You know, whether or not they want to say test this thing out and perhaps test the waters for a deeper relationship behind kind of a partnership, whether that's, JV or something beyond that, perhaps. But I would guess that they just they're using this as a mechanism to go out and say, hey, we're more of a differentiator than some of these other options that are out there. Because like you just said, right, other companies such as Amex and others can presumably offer pretty similar functionality, and this, gives them either a leg up or perhaps kind of levels the playing field.
Adnan, my yes to that totally. You basically you want to polish up before you list yourself for sale. And then I actually thought the timing of this was not accidental, because think about it, you're kind of introducing tens of thousands of additional merchants in theory, but really Klarna will have to provide some of their revenue to these merchants as a fee or a toll for being on their platform as a payment option. And so you can kind of think of it as like a long tail of low margin business. And I think it sounds like a large number of merchants. And the truth is there won't be proof in the pudding of how did this financially turn out for them in a year's time before the IPO. So I think for retail investors, they just see the big numbers of new expansion, and it probably gives them a little higher likelihood of a pop, even if from a EBITDA perspective, it moves the needle very little. But well, who knows? But I kind of think it's a little more marketing at the moment, like flash in the pan than more bark than bite.
I think you had two questions in there, Tracy. So one is, typical IPOs or typical sort of movement or transactions like this. I think from, from what I've been a part of, you have to keep going with your business model that's right for your company, regardless of which stage you're at in going IPO. And the reason is IPO, as we all know, can be moved for a plethora of reasons. So holding something back because you're in the middle of a conversation about an M&A, or pushing something out because of a partnership or whatever, you can do that, and I've seen people do it for various reasons, do that, but it's hard to not keep your business moving because your IPO date changes quite a bit based on so many other factors and variables. So I think in this situation, if I was them, I would continue with any kind of partnerships. If it's right for my business, if it's right for my investors, I would have to continue because I don't know what's going to happen with my IPO. So that's one sort of fundamental foundational thing. The other is for them to actually go through this transaction. And your second question is sort of this buy now, pay later approach. I know you and I, Tracy, have talked about this quite a bit, which is this world that we're going to kind of go into, this world of personalization. I think this world of how you pay, quote unquote, pay for your goods that you buy typically online nowadays, I think that world is going to change. And I think Klarna and Stripe and all of these companies that are in the middle of this transaction world that's there, I think they're up for some level of change. I think you're going to see more things like barter, more things like other types of currency. You're going to see this buy now, pay later. So I think all of these things are pointing to a trend where consumers want to be able to buy what they want and pay for it the way they need to pay for it for that time and moment. So giving consumers options of how they pay for what is becoming a differentiator for these online companies. And so I think there is a very bright future. I don't know if this is a marketing thing, Pete, but my thing is I think this just created value for Klarna, which is sizable. And they're going to be able to get a lot out of the public market because of this partnership. I think it's pretty big.
It's kind of interesting the way that you frame that, because in my mind, as you were saying that, one of the things that comes up is, in essence, these companies have removed some of that friction via the buying process that allows them to go and offer incremental options, right? You think about like kind of the days before you're buying anything online, you're walking into a shop, and yes, there might be a couple different options to be able to buy things in different ways. People might remember the days of layaway and things like that, but in order to do that, you have to go through a process, and it's, for lack of a better term, a bit of a pain in order to do that. But now, because of the way that these technology companies are positioned, more access to data, you can use things to kind of get bank transactional data, integrate into the buying process. It takes maybe a minute or two, depending on where you are. So that just opens the door to be able to allow all these different options for consumers, like you were saying, in a pretty easy, frictionless way that provides kind of real value depending on what the consumer's needs are at that specific time.
All right, we'll see what happens with that. I think it's cool also, like, just because as I was looking at like their competitors and then looking at the trend overall, there's like the big banks that are taking part of it. And then there's also like new startups, and you've got like a big range of different size companies that are jumping into this huge growth in fintech. So I think to your point, Jeet, also about the personalization of how pricing happens, like I think we're going to see a lot of change in this in the next couple months, years.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Without a doubt. I think it'll be hard for larger banks, larger credit holders, institutions to do some things like this. It's meant for these companies are proving out the technology first, proving out a platform, proving out the technology, making sure it's safe, it's scalable, it's applicable. You can hook to the transaction platforms that are already existing. You're figuring all these things out first. And then what happens is typically the larger guys who have the cash goes, hey, you want to get bought out? You want to merge? You want to do these things? And all of a sudden they're buying a established business, right? That's one of the oldest stories in business. And I think you'll see some of that is larger banks staying on the sidelines a little bit, maybe some little pilot programs of their own platforms that they build, testing out in the market. But at the end of the day, they're probably accumulating cash to go out and make a big splash when the time is right.
Watching.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. Okay. Let's talk about Nordstrom. This was in the Wall Street Journal. Nordstrom family reaches $4 billion deal to take retailer private. So Nordstrom has been around forever. They've been public since the 70s. They were almost bought out, or they almost took a deal from a PE firm in 2017. But what was interesting about this one, there was a different video that I sent you guys from this guy, Andrew Moles, who walked through the pricing psychology of Nordstrom as a business. So there were a few things that he walked through in that. One was the existence of Nordstrom Rack. So it's like Nordstrom Rack as a store is kind of a gateway to train. He was talking about Gen X, but to value the main store pricing. Then you've got the scarcity of the anniversary sales that Nordstrom does. And then you've also got these like aspirational anchors, which make the regular quote unquote pricing from the other stuff in Nordstrom feel reasonable. So what stood out to you about this one?
I can go jump in first here. I think first of all, Nordstrom being bought out by a Mexican company, to me, I found that to be a little funny. So that should that should make for some fun headlines.
Only 10% of the partnership, right? But nonetheless.
Yeah, that's right. So that I found to be funny. But regardless, we know that the last 15 years there's an evolution of brick and mortar. Nordstrom, I think, has done a good job compared to other brick and mortars retailers of staying alive. This is really the transition to online. These retailers, it's not about profitable growth. It's really about just staying alive. Some people have done better, and things like that. And we've seen that and we've talked about it with some of the retailers, but that's very few compared to the sizes of malls that we grew up in, that we used to go to in high school and things like that. But it is important to know that there is a segment of the population that still are mall goers. So when I drive to my buddy's house, we have to drive by a very big mall here in the East Valley of Phoenix. And through Christmas, through Thanksgiving, that whole area was jam-packed of traffic. So it's not like people don't like to go shopping. Even in my opinion, the worst time to shop brick and mortar is during that time. It's shoulder to shoulder people, but they're doing it. It's not like they're disappearing. So the footfalls, the traffic that they're looking for as a brick and mortar, it exists. It might not be as consistent as it used to be, but it exists. So there's something that's there. So I think this is an opportunity for Nordstrom to get out of the public eye, literally, and go private so they can restructure themselves on what's best to align with how consumers buy, how they want to experience, what level of products do they buy online versus in person, because we know the larger brands, larger meaning more expensive retail brands like Louis Vuitton and others, people like to go into the store and have an experience. It's an experience for them. It's not just buying the goods, it's the experience of buying a Louis Vuitton purse. So, how are they going to reshift themselves to align with what those consumer needs are and how the consumer wants to buy and what they want to buy? I think the second thing to your story about the pricing, I disagree with that person quite a bit, because I think a lot of stores kind of do the same thing on price anchoring with larger goods, making the things. And frankly, Cartier doesn't have discounting stores. So the yearly sales that Nordstrom does, high-end stores do that all the time. High-end stores don't have discounts by week, by month, by day, typically. That's not how the people that are coming through your doors, that you're segmenting out, that's coming through your door, they're not price sensitive. So why are you giving a discount? They're already coming through your door. Why would you give a discount to buy? In fact, discounts could be looked at last year's goods. They're going to be looked at as not as fresh and new. And I don't want to be caught wearing those clothes, the items and all that stuff. So it depends on that segment you're going after. So I don't think this person that had that video said anything unique that other retailers don't do. So I would dismiss what he says, and it's not a new understanding of their pricing strategy.
I think yes to that, and I think your answer is a little bit more nuanced. Of what I was thinking is that the current Nordstrom family has over a 30% stake in the organization already today, which by definition, with the way voting works, it is a controlling stake. Like you don't need many more people to get online, and the percentage of retail investors who don't vote at all, anything they want to do to the company, they can. So they've already got that ability. So then the question is, why do it in the private market versus the public market? I think that's where it gets to your solution, which is, maybe the cost of reporting in the public market are higher, and or just the visibility for either drastic cost cutting measures or restructuring and or new investments they'd want to make would be looked poorly in the short term in the public market if you're looking at quarter to quarter results and they're like, hey, we need to survive for the next 5-10 years or grow there. We'd rather sort of do it with a timeline that's more out of our own choosing. And so if you go private, then you can do that. So it'll be interesting to see, do they shrink? Do they try to expand? Do they rejigger stores? All of that stuff is probably a play and would be more flexible to do with a private company than a public. So that's sort of what I took away from it, because the Nordstrom family can already, in theory, do that stuff. It's just they're going to get punished from a valuation perspective, and then maybe that would leave them open to some sort of takeover.
It is harder to do because I was with a company that was public and then went private, and now they're back being public. It's very difficult to make fundamental go-to-market changes as a public company.
Yeah.
You can't hide dollars. You can't say you're testing something. You can't, because your customers are going to get ticked off. Your stock price is going to tank. Executives are going to get cut. Like all of these things happen as a knee-jerk reaction to any smell of anything, where you're kind of restricted in what you can test and try and do, and see what works. So I think they are in the mode of understanding what customer needs are and how people want to buy from Nordstrom. I don't think they've figured that out, obviously. And because they haven't figured it out, I think this is a great strategy to come off of the public market, to figure that out, test different things, try different things. And it's not a problem going back public again. That's easy.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of harkens back to a lot of some of what we talked about in past episodes towards the end of last year with disruption in the retail market, right? I think we talked about like Starbucks, Nike, perhaps even Chipotle. Things are very much changing in the retail market. Things that worked, even 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, clearly are not working. And to the point that's made is doing that in the public eye, it can be tough. But then the other piece is there's just a lot of funding in the private markets. So that decision just becomes a little bit easier to say, hey, a lot of people are out there want to make these types of investments and might have a little bit more patience with us once we lay out, and we don't have to do this under the scrutiny of public markets, and can make that process a bit easier for us to go through. Because when I think about the retail market and kind of the way that I like to buy things, there's an element of it that I would without a doubt want to do online. But at the same time, there are certain situations where I'm like, okay, I need to go to a store because, Christmas shopping, last minute shopping, those types of things. I need this thing in the next hour. The only option is to go to a store. But having that seamless experience between online store is a very difficult operational problem to be able to execute upon. So the more they can move in that direction is going to be better. And I think what they've kind of decided is that that's going to be easier to do outside of the scrutiny of the public markets.
And interesting too, I guess we'll yet to be seen, but maybe their financing cost in the private market is going to be far less with all the dry powder sitting on the sidelines. And they're like, all right, we don't need to fund this with public debt.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's jump to Boeing. So Boeing, 2024 for Boeing, this is CNN business. Boeing closes the books on a terrible 2024. Boeing is still $77 billion company. They're number 52 in the Fortune 500. However, last year, the year started out for them with that door ripping off that Alaskan Airlines flight. That was January. They had other PR issues. There was a strike in September around worker pay. We talked about them in the summer because they were in those big public negotiations with the Air Force.
Yep.
But they hired a new CEO in August. So, and this guy's made some different comments about how there's no silver bullet. He said, the trust in our company is eroded. We're saddled with too much debt. We've had serious lapses in our performance across the company, which has disappointed many of our customers. There is much work ahead to return to the excellence that made Boeing an iconic company. I saw this other article in MarketBeat that I thought was worth referencing. They said, here are the 4 reasons why Boeing is going to be the comeback story of 2025. Number 1, the bar is low and the worst is behind them. Number 2, their backlog is over $500 billion. So their backlog was over, part of their issues were the operational issues in production. But people kind of just have to put up with the delay in deliveries. So their backlog was over 6,200 airplanes. And the deals are going to keep coming in per my previous comment about their status. Lower oil prices boost airline margins. And then December 18th, all of their production went back online, which helped kind of boost their stock from the original dip. So thoughts on this one?
So many thoughts. One thought I had was that, what's interesting is that, so first of all, Boeing is sort of the definition of too big to fail. They are the US representative in like the duopoly of the two-horse race that is the airline production market with Airbus and Boeing. Airbus has benefited certainly from orders that have not gone to Boeing that go to them. So I kind of looked at just the backlog of each, and more or less the current production rates. Airbus is about 15 years out if you order a plane today. Boeing is about 10 years out. So in some ways, there's like a headwind for volume shifting away from Boeing, because you're an airline and fuel costs are low and you want to invest in your brand and have service that appeals to consumers and you want new aircraft and you can get it 5 years sooner with Boeing. I think that's going to become a value driver, and so probably makes pricing and their performance relatively sticky, because it probably is a pendulum that kind of shifts back. It's hard to get too unbalanced unless Airbus really expands their capacity and becomes like a very different entity. I feel like there's probably always going to be a kind of a seesaw between the two, and it's probably going to come back towards Boeing in the next couple of years.
That's kind of fascinating. I mean, where my head was after kind of reading through some of the headlines and such, you think about the first conversation we were having where Klarna's going and partnering with Stripe and thinking about how to add incremental value. But now Boeing is in a position where it's kind of that opposite problem where, from a brand perspective and perception perspective, the value is pretty clearly diminishing over time. But to your point, operating in this kind of duopoly environment, it may not be that big of a deal since there's not a whole lot of options out there for them. The cost of entry into a market like that is obviously massive, right? Nobody can really do it, and operational execution is something that they have to fix. In terms of accessing that customer base, their customers are going to continue to have to come to them just because there's those lack of options that are out there. So some of these more kind of traditional value drivers and that kind of lack of operational execution plays less of a factor in a market that is just frankly not very competitive.
It's really interesting to me. It is a big story, but it's not a story. It really isn't a story because it doesn't affect anything. To all the points that all three of you have made, the demand's there. They're gonna make products. They're gonna get paid for their products. They're gonna do well, and you're gonna move on to the next year. It's amazing to me. And the new CEO pointed out the right problem that they have, which is operations. So, okay, they've identified the problem. They're going to fix it. They're going to move on. So the only thing I would say is stock price sometimes and valuation of companies, a perception of how it's going to perform in the future. And one mistake that I think they did make is when the doors blew off, there were so many conspiracy theories. There were so many things that was around it. Like the video clip going missing of, the manufacturing of that door for that specific unit, things like that. There's a lot of sort of weirdness that's there. I think they did a poor job of controlling that narrative, because companies usually have an opportunity, sounds very capitalistic of me, but has an opportunity to do better than going into the issue that they were going into if they handle the issue properly. So they can come back stronger. And I think Boeing missed that. Boeing missed gathering that consumer confidence from a very significant issue that they had. They kind of just swept it underneath the rug, and they just said exactly what we said. They've got demand. They know what the problem is. They're going to fix the problem. They're going to fulfill demand.
Yeah.
They're going to be off to 2025 and 2026. No issues, no problems. Everybody's there. And part of it is because demand is so high. I mean, you guys know I was traveling through the holidays. Every airport I was at, packed, absolutely packed. So it's not like travel is kind of saying, "Oh my God, I don't want to fly 50% of the flights that are Boeing." No, like demand is there, everything is there, nothing is changing. So it's really a non-story story. The only thing I can nitpick on is how they handle the door and the operations of it and the whole issue there. I think they could have come back a lot stronger if they handled that situation more head on and kind of fixed it right out of the gate instead of trying to cover some of these things up and trying to put a lipstick on it, because it does. Consumer perception does, it creates that vacuum that sometimes startups can use that to get in and kind of start being an ankle biter at that point. So I would have probably avoided that piece of it. But besides that, I don't think this is much of a story.
Said another way, acknowledge, apologize, overcorrect, move on to the
Yeah.
next thing. Memories are short.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's crazy that was a year ago. Like
Yeah.
to your point, I was going back, like, what did happen with Boeing last year?
Don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah, right.
It does show the character of a company, right? I mean, it really does, and it's unfortunate that they didn't utilize that.
Yeah. All right, Nvidia. So they announced their supercomputer project Digits. So a couple things about this that stood out to me. They priced it this was in the last couple of weeks, they priced this at $3,000 and it's set to launch in May. So I thought we could talk about the price point a little bit. This is a compact AI supercomputer. There's a couple other tangents in this. One of them being that this will allow people to be less reliant on cloud. So you've got this little hardware piece that kind of could disrupt a whole thing with people's reliance on cloud, people's hesitation about how cloud could potentially be a security issue. These are like some of the different articles that have happened since the announcement. But let's start with talking about the price point, because I think this made me think of like our conversations around Reddit, where you've got like, they're trying to kind of, or what this could do is democratize tech. Because at a $3,000 price point, first of all, I'm like, should we share one? Should we get one? Like the price point being so accessible to like people that are developers and individual innovators or whatever was what stood out to me first. They're not going for necessarily the big corporations.
Yeah, I mean, the first thought that comes to my mind is this is a problem. Like the challenge they're looking to address seems to be one that I could see a pretty wide population encountering. Just in the day-to-day operations of our company, one of the big things is just computing power, and we have the need for a pretty significant amount of computing power, the time to process, the ability to kind of handle excessive amounts of data. I have to think that that's a challenge for a lot of different people, and they're thinking through increasingly sophisticated architectures for them to address that problem. So if what NVIDIA is doing is trying to really address that challenge head on, then it seems like this is something that's super valuable in the market, and kind of a shift from what they're traditionally doing, where it's not necessarily that single user that they're trying to address. It tends to be kind of more on the enterprise side. So it feels like a pretty solid move from them in terms of being able to address that challenge.
I was going to say, so I don't know that I fully understand the use case, but I was just thinking for myself, like, would I be likely to buy an AI computer hardware in addition to my Lenovo and just have it side by side or replace it? And I'm like, yeah, I don't really know. The other question I had about it is that, I feel like the whole angle on AI and these GPUs is that you can have remote compute, remote desktop, whatever it is, access these platforms that kind of use server farms away from you. And by buying it in a hardware platform that sits in your desk, doesn't it start aging immediately? And you kind of lose that advantage of being able to use the latest and greatest remotely from wherever you are. And so that's sort of why I wonder what will the use case be? And is it more about NVIDIA positioning themselves as just being in the forefront, like basically cheap way to stay top of mind and in the news, to show they can be more things to more people. So that was sort of my thought. I don't know need to look into it further, but that was sort of where I was going, was when I wanted to just use the latest and greatest remotely as opposed to have something static on my desk.
These are the 3 use cases I saw. This said AI research and development. So this allows users to develop AI models for image recognition, natural language processing, and other complex tasks, of course. Edge computing applications, ideal for industries like healthcare, manufacturing, or autonomous systems that require AI computation at the point of data collection, or enhanced privacy for sensitive data. So for organizations that are handling confidential data, because then everything stays local without exposure to cloud.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Which,
So I saw this thing on Instagram, which I found fascinating. I didn't double check the facts of it, so I hope it's true. Which is
It must be.
yeah, it must be. Between the Wright brothers discovering sort of aviation to somebody, to the moon landing was 66 years. In my head, I was kind of doing the rough math, and I think it's about right, so it said 66 years. And to think about the technology advancement from Ohio and these like twigs basically taking off and elevating all the way to landing on the moon, and what it must take from an innovation perspective to get there in 66 years, it was just mind-boggling, the amount of technology that it took. And I use that as an example because I think AI is at a point where it's even farther behind, us discovering the airplane, from a AI and the evolution of AI and what we can do with AI. And that 66 years is probably like 66 months, of what can happen, and making it really useful. So I think NVIDIA's plan of charging it, to get back to your question, Tracy, of $3,000. First of all, I think I'm going to be a buyer. I'm pretty sure I'll be a buyer, not because I know what I'm going to use it for. It's more of I want to tinker, And I think NVIDIA is growing the pie. They're not trying to say NVIDIA is going to be the number one thing, which by default they already are right now. So they've made their money. They've gotten their share. They're in the forefront. And now what they're saying is, I can't take any more of AMD's market share and Intel's market share and Motorola's market share. I need to grow the pie. And I know AI use cases are going to grow. We don't even know what it is, because we don't know the most, and they don't have enough employees to go figure out what all those use cases are going to be. They're going to take advantage of the consumer and say, we're going to crowdsource the end applications for AI. So I'm going to charge $3,000 and I'm going to put it out there at these endpoints, and you guys are going to come up with these end applications to drive value for yourself. And we're going to see how that works, so we can understand how that sort of exponential growth in technology is going to happen in a very short and limited time, so we stay in front of it as much as possible. So I think $3,000 is actually a fantastic price point. I think anything less than $4,000, roughly speaking, $4,000 or $5,000, it makes it into a strike range for somebody that's sort of working a professional white collar 9 to 5 job that can kind of get it. If you think about it, even for non-white collar jobs, if you think of the gaming industries and how much all the equipment costs that people use, and they get value from it, it's up there. So I think his price point is actually phenomenal, because it's targeting the mass market to be able to go tinker and figure out those end applications. I think the cloud thing is a little weird, because you're playing to sort of uncertainty and doubt there, because if my entire portfolio of financial $10 that I own is on the cloud, and everybody's medical records is on the cloud, everybody's financial records on the cloud, IRS is on the cloud, don't give me this cloud is dangerous, you need 4 terabytes sitting on your desk. To Pete's point, the best thing about the cloud, and at least for our clients and everything that we work for, is to update and refresh data on a continuous basis, so we have the best data to be able to do our analysis on. Well, if you have an endpoint of 4 terabytes sitting on my my desk drawer, nothing is getting refreshed. So I'm using stale data to run whatever algorithm I'm running on, to do whatever I need it to do, which might be okay. So I don't think playing to that fear is the right way to go. I think it's much more, maybe I'm just an optimist. It's much more fun to talk about what are all the applications I could possibly use it for? What can I do to make my life as a professional, as a private person, all of those things? How do I add value to my world by having this very powerful compute power in my fingertips?
So you don't think we're going to swing back to hardware on everything?
No.
I mean, that's why I said the thing about Reddit, because it also, like, if this is now in the hands of more people, is this also going to push on other parts of the ecosystem, like training, like for people to learn AI, and then the demand for that kind of thing will go up now that they have access to something like this. I just wonder what it will change.
There's two answers to that. There's definitely going to be pockets of needs that pop up, like you're suggesting. But remember, like AI is a natural language processing power horse, right? So you don't need training. You can literally go, hey, how much money did I make yesterday? What was my biggest leakage? You could basically speak to it like a layperson, and you have the power of doing peer group benchmarking at your fingertips, and it's giving you the answers that you're looking for. You don't need to know what a conjoint is. You don't need to know what a Bayesian model is that you have to run to get you the insights. You can just ask for insights. So training is an antiquated concept when it comes to some of these applications. The trick is, what insight are you looking for? And how do you set up your environment to be able to go get that insight? It's fascinating. And without a doubt, I'm getting one. It's probably going to collect dust like my weightlifting equipment and other things, but
The mirror.
the mirror, that's right. It'll be a great place to hang my sweatshirt.
Yeah, it's a great talking point when you have company.
It's true. Right. It's like a piece of art.
Yeah,
right. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll put it in a glass or a top and put it in my living room.
That's right.
Did he make hardware? Why, yes, they do.
That's right. Well, we're gonna have a lot to talk about these next couple months. I also think, by the way, there's a couple more deep dives we can do. That our feedback on the Intel episode was really good, so I'd like to do more of that style. So more to come with this. Thank you for doing this, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Awesome.